Most rappers chase moments. Jadakiss chased leverage. In an industry addicted to heat, hype, and temporary dominance, he built something far more dangerous than popularity. He built trust. After this moment, we won't need the full name anymore, because the culture already knows who we're talking about. Jada. Hip-hop has always rewarded what's loud, who's hot right now, who's sold the most this quarter, who's trending this week. But heat fades. And when it fades, what's left? That's where most careers collapse. But Jada didn't build his foundation on heat. He built it on durability. Before the debates, before the business ventures, before the legendary stage moments, there was Yonkers. Not Manhattan glamour, not Brooklyn mythology, not Queensbridge folklore. Yonkers. Industrial, unpolished. Close enough to New York City to feel the pressure, far enough to be overlooked. That kind of environment doesn't create celebrities, it creates survivors. And survival became Jada's natural posture. He moved observant, he moved patient, he moved calculated. While other young artists chased attention, he studied systems. Who owned what? Who controlled publishing? Who kept earning after the applause stopped? Even early on, he understood something most artists learn too late. Fame is rented. Ownership is permanent. When he formed the Locks with Styles and Chic, it wasn't about flash, it was about alignment. 3 different personalities, 3 different energies, 1 unified front. No weak link, no ego implosions, no internal sabotage. Groups usually collapse from inside. Competition, jealousy, solo ambition. But the Locks treated loyalty like infrastructure. That would matter later. The mid-90s brought a major opportunity. Bad Boy. At the time, that logo meant exposure. Radio spins, television presence, national visibility. On the surface, it looked like the promised land. But visibility isn't control. Behind the glossy visuals and polished production, Jada was paying attention. Who owned the masters? Who dictated contracts? Who collected the long-term revenue? He realized quickly, the loudest artist in the room isn't the most powerful. The one who owns the room is. That lesson never left him. The transition to Rough Riders shifted the energy. Less gloss, more grit. The aesthetic hardened, the sound sharpened. Now the environment matched the temperament. And this is where Jada began separating himself in a quiet way. He wasn't chaotic, he wasn't reckless, he wasn't unpredictable. He was controlled. That control became his signature. In a genre often driven by impulse, control is rare, and rare things hold value. By the early 2000s, something subtle but powerful started happening. He became the industry's stabilizer. When a record felt too commercial, they called Jada. When an artist needed credibility injected into a rollout, they called Jada. When a single felt polished but hollow, they called Jada. Not because he was screaming the loudest, because he was consistent. And consistency in a volatile industry becomes currency. Albums build stars. Features build influence. Jada mastered the feature economy. He understood something most rappers never figure out. You don't have to dominate every record. You have to elevate it. There's a difference. Some feature artists hijack tracks. They overshadow the main act. That excites fans. It terrifies executives. Because executives don't want their investment eclipsed. Jada enhanced records without destabilizing them. He added weight without creating imbalance. That's strategic awareness. That's executive-level thinking inside an artist's body. And then came the real stress test. The early 2000s belonged to 50 Cent. Commercial dominance, massive numbers, radio control. The industry tilted towards spectacle, and Jada wasn't moving those numbers. But when tension escalated and diss records entered the conversation, something revealing happened. His responses charted. That detail matters. Because it exposed something critical. Sales don't automatically equal authority. Even without being the highest seller, when Jada spoke, the culture paused. He didn't rely on marketing machines. He relied on credibility accumulated over time. That's leverage. And leverage survives trends. He wasn't trying to win a commercial war. He was protecting positioning. There's a difference. One strategy chases spikes, the other protects flaws. And flaws don't collapse easily. Around that same era, he made another revealing observation. He said labels were signing artists who sounded like him. That wasn't arrogance, that was awareness. His cadence had become template level. His tone was being mirrored. His delivery was influencing the market. When competitors start duplicating your style, you've already shaped the direction. He understood his market value even when contracts didn't fully reflect it. That's not ego, that's strategic clarity. Here's what separated him during those moments. He didn't spiral, he didn't overextend, he didn't chase controversy for visibility. He responded when necessary. Then returned to discipline. That's executive behavior, not emotional behavior. And the industry notices that. Over time, he wasn't just respected, he was relied upon. That's a different level. Respect is admiration. Reliance is dependence. And when an industry begins depending on you, you've crossed into a different tier. He reinforced it with one phrase: top 5 dead or alive. Not a statistic, a psychological anchor. By inserting himself permanently into that debate, he ensured longevity. You can't remove someone from the conversation if their name never leaves it. It was branding disguised as bravado, and it worked. But none of it truly crystallized yet. The full demonstration of his value was still coming. Not in a studio, not on a diss record. On a stage, in front of the entire culture. And when that moment arrived, everything he had built quietly over decades would become visible all at once. The moment arrived in a way no one expected. What was supposed to be nostalgia turned into evaluation. The Lox versus Dipset, two eras colliding, two movements standing across from each other. One stage. At first glance it looked like a celebration. Old records, old energy, old memories. But underneath the surface, something else was happening. This wasn't about hits. It was about authority. Dipset entered with charisma, energy, flash. They embodied a specific era of dominance, anthems that once controlled clubs and car stereos, momentum that once felt unstoppable. But momentum and structure are not the same thing, and Jada understood that difference better than anyone on that stage. From the first exchange, his posture told the story, calm, composed, measured. He didn't scream. He didn't rush. He didn't overperform. He let the beat breathe. He let the lines land. He let silence work in his favor. That's the difference between someone trying to win a moment and someone who knows they already own the room. Every verse felt like evidence. Every hook felt heavier. Every pause felt intentional. He wasn't reliving an era. He was demonstrating why that era mattered. That's authority. Not hype. Not nostalgia. Authority. What made the night unforgettable wasn't just delivery. It was control. When tension rose, he steadied it. When the crowd leaned one direction, he redirected it. Leadership isn't volume. It's composure under pressure. And composure wins wars. By the time the event ended, something rare happened. The internet agreed. There wasn't a long debate. There wasn't a split decision. There wasn't confusion. The culture knew what it had just witnessed. Dominance. And at the center of it was Jada. Not because he was flashy, because he was precise. For younger viewers who only knew his name from conversations, that night turned reputation into proof. For older viewers, it felt like validation. Time had confirmed what they already believed. But the real victory wasn't the performance. It was what came after. He didn't chase a viral wave. He didn't flood the market with reaction content. He didn't attempt to capitalize emotionally. He returned to discipline. That restraint matters. Most artists mistake resurgence for reinvention. He understood resurgence as reinforcement. There's a difference. While others chase relevance, he built structure. Brick and mortar businesses, real addresses, real communities. Juice bars rooted in neighborhoods that needed options beyond liquor stores and fast food. Coffee shops that weren't marketing gimmicks but actual presence. That's not social media wealth. That's infrastructure. Streams fluctuate. Footprints remain. He understood something simple but powerful. If your income depends entirely on trends, your stability is fragile. If your stability includes ownership, your future is protected. That's the evolution most artists never reach. They build brand. He built assets. As media shifted and podcast culture exploded, he stepped into that lane without desperation. No forced slang. No clout chasing. No pretending to be 25 again. Just perspective. And perspective becomes premium when it's backed by experience. He didn't compete with younger voices. He offered something they couldn't replicate, longevity. And longevity commands attention in ways hype cannot. Look at the pattern. He survived the ringtone era. He survived the blog era. He survived the streaming transition. He survived the social media shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, steadily. That's rare. Most artists are built for one cycle. He was built for multiple. The industry once called him to stabilize records. Now his entire career represents stabilization. In a culture driven by chaos, he became a symbol of control. In a genre often defined by volatility, he represented discipline. And discipline compounds. It compounds in respect. It compounds in leverage. It compounds in opportunities that only come to people who don't implode. Here's what makes this blueprint dangerous. He didn't need to dominate every metric. He needed to remain intact. Because being intact long enough allows compounding to do the rest. Compounding of reputation, compounding of relationships, compounding of trust. And trust in business is currency. He didn't reinvent himself to survive, he refined himself. That's a quieter move, but a more powerful one. Reinvention often signals instability. Refinement signals confidence. He never looked unsure of who he was. That's why the culture never questioned his placement for long. And that's why when his name enters debates, it doesn't feel forced. It feels earned. There's no campaign behind it, no algorithm push, just decades of receipts. And receipts are hard to argue against. By this point, something had become undeniable. He wasn't just a respected rapper. He was an institution. Not because he was the loudest, not because he sold the most. Because he endured without losing integrity. And endurance is the ultimate separator. But endurance alone doesn't define legacy. Legacy is what remains after endurance, and that final layer is where the real blueprint becomes clear. Endurance alone doesn't create legacy. Plenty of artists last, very few remain powerful. There's a difference. Power isn't about noise, it's about positioning. And by this stage of his career, Jada had positioned himself in a way most artists never do. He wasn't dependent on a label cycle. He wasn't waiting on radio validation. He wasn't hoping for algorithm mercy. He had leverage. And leverage changes how you move. Look at how he handled visibility. When the spotlight returned after the stage dominance, he didn't chase every interview. He didn't oversaturate timelines. He didn't try to repackage himself for a younger demographic. He let the moment breathe. That's confidence. Artists who fear irrelevance grab every camera. Artists who understand their value pick their moments. This is where the business layer becomes undeniable. Because outside of music, he wasn't idle. While many artists from his era struggled with transition, he quietly built anchors. Physical locations, community-based businesses, real presence in real neighborhoods, not branding exercises, not quick flips, not endorsements tied to trends, actual storefronts, actual employment, actual infrastructure. That move tells you everything about mindset. If your only income stream is performance, your future depends on demand. If your income includes ownership, your future depends on structure. Structure survives slow seasons. There's something psychologically powerful about that. When the culture sees an artist invest back into their own community, it changes perception. He wasn't escaping his origin story, he was reinforcing it. That deepens loyalty, and loyalty extends longevity. At the same time, he stepped into media without turning into a caricature of himself. He didn't try to become a shock personality. He didn't lean into controversy for clicks. He spoke like someone who had already proven himself. That tone matters. Experience delivered calmly carries more weight than loud opinion. He understood that his voice wasn't just an instrument for rhymes anymore. It was an instrument for perspective. And perspective, monetized correctly, becomes another asset. By now, the pattern is impossible to ignore. He never chased reinvention. He refined identity. Reinvention often comes from insecurity. Refinement comes from certainty. He knew exactly who he was. That clarity protected him. Because in hip-hop, confusion is expensive. Artists who don't know who they are get pulled in every direction. He never looked pulled. He looked planted. And that's the word that defines this stage of his career. Planted, not floating between trends, not drifting through eras. Planted. When you're planted, storms don't uproot you easily. They pass, and you remain. What makes this blueprint even more impressive is what he avoided. No public meltdowns, no desperate attempts to recreate youth, no visible financial implosions, no scrambling for relevance. Discipline doesn't make headlines, but it preserves empires. The industry once called him when they needed stabilization. Now his entire career represents stabilization. When younger artists enter rooms with him, the energy shifts. Because they know they're standing next to someone who survived every era they grew up watching. That presence carries weight. Weight can't be manufactured. It accumulates. Here's the quiet truth. Many artists burn bright, few burn long. Fewer burn long without shrinking. He never shrank. He didn't become a nostalgia act. He didn't fade into remember when. He remained present. And presence is power. At this point, the argument isn't about ranking. It's about architecture. Some careers are built like fireworks. Brilliant, explosive, temporary. His career was built like infrastructure. Not flashy from a distance, but essential, reliable, load-bearing. When the culture leans on certain pillars, those pillars matter more than the fireworks ever did. And this is where the idea of value becomes crystal clear. Value isn't what trends assign you. Value is what time confirms. Time confirmed him. Time validated the consistency. Time rewarded the discipline. Time amplified the decisions that looked quiet in the moment. Because while others chased spikes, he built floors. Spikes attract attention. Floors create safety. Safety creates longevity. Longevity creates leverage. And leverage creates freedom. Freedom to move without desperation. Freedom to decline what doesn't align. Freedom to speak without needing approval. That's power. By now it's obvious. He didn't just build a career. He built insulation. Insulation from trends. Insulation from collapse. Insulation from panic. And insulation is what allows you to age in a youth-driven culture without losing relevance. This is the part most people miss. He didn't win by overpowering everyone. He won by outlasting volatility, and volatility eventually exhausts itself. Discipline doesn't. And when the history of this era gets written, the loudest names won't automatically be the most important. The most important will be the ones who stayed intact, the ones who never embarrassed their legacy, the ones who understood that the game isn't about winning every quarter, it's about surviving every cycle. By the time you step back and look at the full arc, one truth becomes unavoidable. He didn't just survive hip-hop. He mastered how to live inside it without being consumed by it. And in a culture where careers disappear overnight, that might be the most powerful accomplishment of all. Most people misunderstand what longevity really means. They think it's about staying visible. It's not. It's about staying valuable. There's a difference. Visibility can be manufactured, value has to be earned, and earned value compounds quietly. Look at how most careers unfold. Early hunger, rapid ascent, peak dominance, gradual decline, desperate reinvention, public fatigue, fade. That cycle repeats over and over again, because most artists build their foundation on momentum. Momentum is powerful, but it's unstable. When momentum slows, panic begins. When panic begins, mistakes multiply. When mistakes multiply, legacies fracture. He avoided that cycle entirely, not by accident, by discipline. He never confused applause with security. He never confused heat with permanence. He never confused visibility with leverage. That clarity protected him from the traps that swallowed others. There's something almost unglamorous about the way he moved. No dramatic financial headlines, no chaotic public breakdowns, no desperate attempts to attach himself to every new sound. Just steady presence. And steady presence doesn't trend, it endures. The industry once called him when they needed credibility injected into a record. Over time, his entire career became a symbol of credibility. That's the shift. At first he stabilized songs, later he stabilized rooms, and eventually he stabilized perception itself. When his name enters a conversation, the temperature changes. That's not hype, that's accumulated weight. Weight doesn't come from shouting, it comes from surviving without shrinking. He never shrank. He didn't become smaller to stay relevant. He didn't dilute himself to stay marketable. He remained proportionate to his history. That's rare. Because history can intimidate artists. History can pressure them to prove something again. He never looked pressured. He looked established. Established is a different energy. Established means you don't need to convince anyone. Established means you don't have to chase validation. Established means your presence does half the work before you even speak. That's where he lives now. In a culture obsessed with who's next, he represents who lasted. And lasting is harder than exploding. Anyone can explode. Very few can remain intact after the explosion fades. He treated success like something fragile, handled carefully, protected intentionally, expanded strategically. That's not flashy, but it's powerful. When you zoom out and examine the full arc, a pattern emerges. He built skill first, then reputation, then leverage, then ownership, then insulation. Most artists stop at reputation. He kept building, layer after layer, until the structure could stand without constant attention. That's why he never needed a dramatic comeback narrative. He never disappeared long enough to require one. He simply continued. And continuation is underrated. Continuation doesn't excite the algorithm, but it strengthens foundations. There's a reason his name still carries weight across generations. Younger artists reference him carefully. Veterans speak about him respectfully. Fans debate him seriously. No one treats him like a relic. No one treats him like a novelty. That's earned positioning. Positioning is the quiet game. It's not about headlines. It's about how rooms respond when you enter. If a room shifts when you arrive, you've built something deeper than popularity. He built that shift, and once you build that shift, you don't need to scream. Silence becomes enough. Most rappers leave moments behind. He left a blueprint. A blueprint for aging without embarrassing yourself. A blueprint for staying relevant without chasing youth. A blueprint for turning credibility into assets. A blueprint for converting reputation into insulation. That blueprint is the real stimulus package. Not just for records, for careers. Because the industry thought they were calling him to save songs. What they were really witnessing was the construction of something durable. Durable careers don't rely on spikes. They rely on structure, and structure survives storms. When history looks back, it won't just measure plaques. It will measure integrity. It will measure composure. It will measure who remained solid when everything around them shifted. And when that measurement happens, his name will not feel forced. It will feel inevitable. Legends aren't defined by how high they peak. They're defined by how long they remain intact. He remained intact. Through trend changes, through industry shifts, through generational turnover, through commercial waves that rose and collapsed, intact. In a culture that consumes its own heroes, that might be the rarest accomplishment of all. He didn't just survive hip-hop, he mastered how to live inside it without letting it consume him. And in a business where most careers burn out fast, that quiet mastery might be the most dangerous move ever made. Fade to black. Silence. Then let the instrumental breathe.